Hey, remember when the smartest guy in the room wasn't the one holding the biggest weapon? He was the one holding a paperclip. Yeah, from 1985 to 1992, MacGyver aired on ABC and quietly turned the action genre sideways. Starring Richard Dean Anderson as Angus MacGyver, with Dana Elcar as his long-suffering boss Pete Thornton, the show followed a government troubleshooter who solved impossible problems using physics, chemistry, and whatever happened to be lying around. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts about MacGyver. Stick around for number one, because the show apparently had fans inside the CIA, and they weren't just watching for fun. Before we get into it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hype this video up. It helps YouTube show this to more retro TV fans just like you. Alright, let's solve some mysteries. Number 15. MacGyver became a real word in the dictionary. You know a character is made it when their name stops being a name and starts becoming a verb. Some characters get action figures, some get lunchboxes. MacGyver? He got the English language. In 2015, Oxford Dictionaries officially added MacGyver as a verb, defined as making or repairing something in an improvised or inventive way, using whatever items are at hand. Now here's where it gets nerdy, but in the best way. There's a difference between Oxford Dictionaries and the full Oxford English Dictionary, which is basically the Hall of Fame for words. The OED didn't publish its entry for MacGyver until 2019, and then in 2022, Merriam-Webster added it too. Very few fictional characters ever get to make that jump. Sherlock Holmes didn't, Magnum didn't, Indiana Jones even didn't. But a guy who once stopped a chemical leak with a chocolate bar? Well, he did. And the dictionaries were honestly pretty late to the party. As early as 1989, Richard Dean Anderson was on the Arsenio Hall show laughing about the fact that people were already using MacGyver as slang for pulling off the impossible with nothing but garbage and some confidence. By 1992, the verb was showing up in print, which meant that someone, somewhere, was casually writing, well, I MacGyvered it, in a sentence, and nobody questioned it. Blockbuster died. VHS died too. But MacGyver, it survived as grammar. Quite possible the most untouchable legacy any TV character has ever pulled off. Number 14. The no-gun rule defined the entire show. Now, from the very first episode, MacGyver was built on a genuinely radical idea for 80s television. What if the hero never picked up a gun? Creator Lee David Zlotoff and executive producer Henry Winkler wanted a character who solved problems without firepower. So instead of bullets, he used physics. Instead of ammunition, ingenuity. And Richard Dean Anderson was completely on board. But there was a technical asterisk. MacGyver does fire an automatic rifle in the pilot during the opening mission. But almost immediately after that, the rule was locked in permanently. And the reason was less philosophical than it was practical. A gun, it's a shortcut. The second that Max got one, the tension disappears. Every problem has the same answer. You take it away, and suddenly every locked door, every ticking bomb, every armed adversary becomes a puzzle instead of a shootout. The rule became so central to the show's identity that writers reportedly joked that if MacGyver ever carried a gun again, it would be to shoot the writer who suggested it. And to anchor it emotionally, the show built the philosophy into Mac's backstory. In the episode Blood Brothers, we learned that MacGyver was involved in a childhood accident where a friend was killed by a handgun. That trauma gave the show's most distinctive creative constraint a genuine emotional foundation underneath it. Number 13, a $40,000 fake rhino fooled the entire country. MacGyver dealt with arms dealers and international criminals, but in 1989, the show nearly got buried by a rhinoceros. In the episode Black Rhino, MacGyver tackled poaching head-on. And because the production team had zero interest in being subtle, they spent $40,000 building a hyper-realistic animatronic rhinoceros. It looked disturbingly real. So real that when the episode aired, ABC's phone lines lit up. Viewers were furious. Animal rights activists flooded the network with complaints, convinced that the show had actually harmed a real rhinoceros on camera. The irony was brutal. The entire point of the episode was anti-poaching. They spent $40 grand trying to protect the rhinos, and they ended up getting accused of hurting one. So when ABC reran the episode in 1990, they made sure to add a disclaimer making it very clear that the animal and the injury were all simulated. And because this was late 80s network television, the episode also ended with a PSA from Richard Dean Anderson himself. warning that black rhinos could face extinction by the year 2000 if poaching continued. Number 12, Dana Elcar was going blind and kept showing up anyway. Dana Elcar played Pete Thornton on MacGyver for the entire run of the series. Mac's boss, his sounding board, and a steady voice in his ear when everything went sideways. Pete wasn't the guy defusing bombs, but he was the guy making sure that someone was there to defuse them. And during Season 6, something very real started happening behind the scenes. Elcar was developing glaucoma. Now, at first, he tried to work through it quietly, but scripts got harder to read, blocking got trickier. He found himself relying on others for things that he always handled on his own. Eventually, he told the production the truth, that he was losing his vision. Now, here's where most shows would have just made a quiet, creative decision. You can write the character out, you can bring in a replacement, or let him fade into the background and just hope that nobody notices. But instead, the producers and Richard Dean Anderson did something that nobody expected. They wrote it into the show.
What's going on with your eyes? It's my peripheral vision.
In the 1991 episode Blind Faith, Pete Thornton is diagnosed with vision loss, directly mirroring Elcar's real condition. Now, the show never turned him into a sympathy project. He was still Pete, he just couldn't see. By the time the series wrapped in 1992, Elcar was legally blind. He performed by having scripts read aloud to him and just memorized everything. He used physical guide marks on set to navigate scenes. The cast adjusted around him, the crew adjusted around him, and when there was talk of quietly phasing Pete out, Anderson reportedly pushed back. He wanted Elcar's real struggle reflected on screen, not just swept under the rug. Number 11. The pilot was so bad, 2 people used fake names. Now, before MacGyver became a household name, the first episode nearly torpedoed the entire operation. The original 1985 pilot was shot as a full 90-minute TV movie, and according to executive producer John Rich, it was a mess. It was slow, bloated, and just wandering. ABC reportedly looked at the finished product and saw what Rich later called a dead duck. So, over one Easter weekend, Rich hacked 30 minutes out of it. The episode was carved down to a tight 60 minutes that actually moved. Problem solved. Well, not for everyone. The original director, Gerald Friedman, was so furious with the edits that he petitioned the Directors Guild to have his name removed entirely. So the directing credit reads Alan Smithy, the industry's official pseudonym, used from 1968 to 2000, for directors who felt that their vision had been gutted beyond recognition. And it didn't stop there. The writing credit got swapped too, attributed to Thackeray Paller, a pseudonym for series creator Lee David Zlotoff. 2 fake names on 1 pilot. That's not a production credit, that's a witness protection program. Number 10, Richard Dean Anderson was already MacGyver before the audition. Now, some actors spend months preparing for a role, but Richard Dean Anderson, he just showed up with a resume that already looked like a MacGyver episode. At 17, he and a couple of friends biked from Minnesota to Alaska, roughly 5,600 miles with no sponsorship and an absolutely reckless amount of teenage confidence. But before acting took off, he worked at Marineland of the Pacific as a stunt diver and whale handler. He performed alongside orcas and pilot whales. Later, during his self-described hippie years, he worked as a mime, a juggler, and even performed as a jester in a Renaissance-style cabaret. And acting wasn't even the original plan. Anderson wanted to play professional hockey.
Show him how to skate now. Go on, Mac. Do it!
That dream ended when he broke both his arms in separate high school games, which might be the most hockey way possible to accidentally end up in Hollywood. The environmentalism, the river rafting, the wandering spirit, none of that required acting. The writers even folded some of Anderson's real-life interests into the character, blurring the line a bit between Richard and Angus until it barely existed. So when MacGyver looked like a guy who'd rather sleep under the stars than check into a hotel, well, that wasn't a performance. That was just casting. Number 9, a ditch broke MacGyver's back. MacGyver could fix a nuclear meltdown with a paperclip, but Richard Dean Anderson, he couldn't fix his own spine.
Now what?
Anderson performed a lot of his own stunts, and his body kept a running tab. One of his worst injuries had nothing to do with an explosion or a collapsing set. During Season 1, Anderson hit a hidden ditch while filming a running scene. The impact caused severe spinal compression that eventually required back surgery and left him with chronic pain for decades. He also tore ligaments in his knees, more than once. At one point, the timing was so bad that the writers had to script a leg injury into an episode just to explain why MacGyver was suddenly limping instead of sprinting. When the series wrapped in 1992, Anderson was physically spent. He later admitted that he walked away because his body couldn't handle the punishment anymore. The production eventually leaned more heavily on his longtime stunt double, Steve Blaylock. But by then, most of the damage was already done. Number 8, fans mailed in MacGyver's best hacks. The producers of MacGyver didn't come up with every escape trick in a writer's room. They let the audience do some of the work, and they paid them for it. The show actively invited fans to mail in ideas for MacGyverisms, clever, scientifically grounded hacks that Mac could use to get out of trouble. If a submission passed the show's internal review, the fan reportedly got somewhere between $100 and $200, which in the 80s, that's enough to buy a VCR or at least a deeply regrettable amount of hair product. Now, thousands of letters poured in. Most, yeah, they weren't usable. Some were probably pretty terrifying, but a few were genuinely brilliant. One of the most famous examples is the radiator egg. In the Season 2 episode Bushmaster, MacGyver seals a leaking radiator by cracking a raw egg into it.
Egg whites are good for a lot of things. Lemon meringue pie, angel food cake, and plugging up radiators.
As the engine heats up, the egg whites cook and harden under pressure, temporarily plugging the leak. It sounds completely made up, except years later, Mythbusters tested the trick during their MacGyver special and confirmed that it actually works. The show wasn't just one man. It was a nationwide think tank with a mailbox. Hey, quick pause. If you're enjoying this countdown, be sure to hit that like button. It tells YouTube that you want more deep dives into the shows that shaped your childhood. And drop a comment with your favorite MacGyver hack. Was it the chocolate bar, the radiator egg, or just something that you definitely tried at home and never told anyone else about? All right, let's get back to the countdown. Number 7, they hired real scientists to check the homework. While other action heroes were surviving impossible situations through sheer size and questionable physics, MacGyver had actual scientists on the payroll making sure that the hacks held up. The show brought in John Koivula, a world-renowned gemologist and chemist affiliated with the Gemological Institution of America. Not exactly the resume that you'd expect behind a guy that was escaping a locked warehouse with a stick of gum and a battery. But that was the gig. Now, Koivula, along with other technical advisors like Jim Green and John Potter, vetted the MacGyverisms to make sure that they were grounded in real physics and chemistry. According to Koivula, roughly 90% of the tricks on the show were based on feasible scientific concepts. And that's what separated MacGyver from everything else on television. The escapes felt earned because somewhere under the TV magic, the math was actually holding it together. Number 6, they hid the dangerous steps so kids, they wouldn't blow themselves up in the garage. The science was real, but the producers, they made sure that it was never complete. Any hack that involved explosives, volatile reactions, or anything that could reasonably end with a fire truck in someone's driveway had something missing on purpose. Now, the writers and technical consultants built in what they call a safety gap. They would deliberately leave out at least one critical ingredient or key step from the most dangerous builds. On screen, the hack looked whole. In practice, if some kid tried to follow along at home, it would fail. The production team treated it like a non-negotiable rule. Show enough to sell the scene, but withhold enough to keep it harmless. Because the last thing the ABC needed was a press conference that started with the words, "Inspired by last night's episode." Yeah, exactly. And those precautions weren't just theoretical. In 1991, the LA Times reported incidents of kids attempting to build homemade devices using household cleaners after watching the show, which is exactly why the production team became even more careful about what made it to air and how much detail they included.
You always got an answer. Doesn't always work. Your batting average is pretty good. Just get us back.
Why? Thought you were having fun.
That was the magic, but it also meant that there was always a kid somewhere that watched a little too closely and was taking notes. Number 5, fans banned MacGyver from having a girlfriend. MacGyver could defuse a bomb, he could escape a locked building, and outsmart an arms dealer before lunch. But apparently one thing he couldn't survive was a steady girlfriend. In Season 6, the writers tried something new. They introduced a recurring love interest named Maria Romberg, played by Brigitte Stenberg.
All those years, all the hate. I never would have known how wonderful he is.
The idea was to give Mac a little stability, a little romance, maybe even the faintest hit of normal personal life. But the fans, they were not interested.
Hell no, to the no, 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 yeah, to the no.
The backlash went deeper than just screen time. Fans saw Mac as a nomadic, unattached, solve-it-all-and-move-on kind of hero. Giving him a permanent girlfriend made the character feel a bit smaller. And if we're being honest, a decent chunk of the audience probably liked the idea that Mac was technically still available, if you know what I mean. The protests worked. Maria disappeared after just a couple of episodes. Romance got dialed way back. Yeah, Mac still had the occasional fling, and old flames showed up from time to time, but the show never attempted a long-term love story ever again. The only woman who stuck around truly was Penny Parker, played by Teri Hatcher, and that relationship was strictly platonic. Instead, the emotional anchor of the show became Mac's friendship with Pete Thornton. Loyalty, trust, mutual respect. That was the kind of relationship that the audience actually cared about protecting. Number 4, nobody knew his first name for 6 years. Not even the crew. For 6 full seasons, nobody knew MacGyver's first name. Not the villains, not the audience, and reportedly, not even most of the crew. Anytime someone got close to asking, Mac dodged it like a man guarding classified information. Early production drafts listed his first name as Stacy, but Richard Dean Anderson and executive producer Henry Winkler looked at that and collectively decided that it wasn't going to happen. But instead of picking a new name, they just erased it entirely. The mystery held until season 7, in the 1991 episode Good Night MacGyver, Part 2. Mac hallucinates that he's in medieval Scotland and meets an ancestor, and casually reveals that they share the same first name, Angus. The name was so closely guarded that it wasn't even written into the final script. Cast and crew allegedly didn't find out until the scene was filmed. Anderson had spotted the name on a Vancouver billboard for pollster Angus Reid and thought that it sounded perfectly Scottish and grounded. And it fit, even if Mac clearly hated it. Throughout the series, he visibly winced at his own first name and insisted on just Mac or MacGyver.
Name's MacGyver. Name's MacGyver. Name's MacGyver. Name's MacGyver.
Which made sense. When your last name becomes an actual word in the dictionary, the first one, it's just decorative. Number 3, cartoon MacGyver almost happened. More than once. Now, back in the day, any show that got popular enough eventually got pitched as a cartoon. So at some point, somebody inevitably asked, what if we animated MacGyver? It got further than you'd think. In the early 2000s, there was a real attempt to launch a spin-off called Young MacGyver, following Mac's nephew Clay. A live-action pilot was actually filmed.
They retail for up to $1 million a carat, and judging from the sample, it was a sizable supply.
Starring Jared Padalecki years before Supernatural, but it didn't get picked up. And part of the reason traces back to Richard Dean Anderson himself. He was fiercely protective of the character, turning down merchandising deals and just refusing to let Mac get reduced to slapstick gimmicks aimed at selling toys. But even without an official cartoon, MacGyver's fingerprints ended up all over animation anyway. And then there was MacGruber, the SNL parody that cranked the improvise under pressure concept to full absurdity.
Making life-saving inventions out of household materials.
Eventually becoming a movie and a TV series. The slapstick version that Anderson specifically wanted to avoid, well, it kind of ended up happening anyway, just with someone else's name on it. But the original Mac, he still stayed untouched. No toy empire and no watered-down cartoon clone. Number 2, MacGyver made the NRA's hit list. In the middle of the 1980s, when every other action hero on screen was basically a walking weapons catalog, MacGyver showed up with a Swiss Army knife and zero interest in ammunition.
Looks like they're spring-loaded. Hang on a second.
And not everyone appreciated that. The show had a firm anti-gun stance baked into its DNA. And in the middle of 80s action culture, where every other leading man solved problems just by emptying a clip, that made MacGyver an outlier. According to executive producer Steve Downing, the show landed on the NRA's radar, and the organization allegedly encouraged members to boycott the series and pressure sponsors to pull their ads. In the decade of Rambo, Commando, and every VHS cover featuring a guy holding something that explodes, well, MacGyver was the one catching the heat, not for firing too many bullets, but for refusing to fire them at all. And Richard Dean Anderson didn't exactly back down. Years later, he said he was proud of the reaction. In his mind, if the show sparked that much noise, it meant that people were actually paying attention. The writers took it as confirmation that they were onto something, and they kept going. And number 1, the CIA was apparently taking notes. Yeah, the show had millions of fans, and apparently some of them had security clearances. During the Cold War, American intelligence ops reportedly watched MacGyver, not just casually, but for inspiration. John Mendez, former chief of disguise at the CIA, has acknowledged that the show's use what's around you philosophy actually resonated inside the agency's Office of Technical Service, the real-world department responsible for field gadgets, concealment devices, and creative problem solving when operations go sideways. And when the show was rigging door alarms out of fishing line and chewing gum, real-world operatives were doing their own version of it. The CIA has publicly shared stories about using dead rats as concealment devices for covert drops. The agency has even hosted events comparing shows like MacGyver to real-world field operations. And while they'll happily point out where TV exaggerates, they've also admitted something else, that the core mindset of creative problem-solving under pressure isn't fiction. That part tracks, which meant that somewhere in some windowless government building, an intelligence officer has almost certainly looked at a broken piece of equipment and thought about what a fictional guy with a mullet would do. But there you have it, 15 weird and wild facts about MacGyver. A show so good that it literally became part of the English language. And honestly, if you've ever fixed something with duct tape and a prayer, you owe this man some royalties. Which fact surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments, and hey, be sure to share this with a friend who still thinks that they can fix a leaky faucet with a paper towel and just sheer willpower. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and ring that bell. And until next time, this is Remember When.